Good, Randy. Good to see you. It has been a minute.
There you go. Awesome. Really excited to have you on. Everybody, this is Richard Harris. He is the author of the new up and coming book, The Seller's Journey. Is it out yet?
It's coming out Thursday. Drops around 2. If you're really eager, I've got some reviews up, so it's actually on Amazon at the moment if you want to go get it. But Thursday's the official launch date.
Awesome. Tucker, maybe you can post it. We got a link, I think, from you before. All right, our title topic is the seller's journey. So certainly will be some fantastic here. I just want to make sure that's right. The sellersjourney.co.
Yeah, that'll work for now. I think there's a free chapter there, but people can find it on Amazon too
All
if
right,
they want the whole thing. I think I'm giving away 2 chapters on negotiation and negotiation with procurement and discounting and how not to discount. So
perfect.
we'll get
All
there.
right. So we're sponsored today by Spotlight.ai, who's a value selling sponsor of Sales Community. Certainly something that's probably a timeless value in the whole selling process. And their platform has a really cool way to also now tie into the different steps of Medic and MedPick. So definitely good to check them out. For those that are members of Sales Community, thanks. For those that are not, Tucker will put up a free link for you all. So feel free to join. Lots of great content there. So getting into it here. So Richard lives in Northern California near Walnut Creek at Moraga. Sounds like
Yep.
sounds like a great spot. He's got a wonderful wife, Kathy, 2 sons, Riley and Bodie, 2 Cavapoos, Lola and Luna.
Yep.
And we're trying to figure out how we first met, but we couldn't, between us, we couldn't quite figure it out. But I know for sure it was around, I think I had seen you certainly post a lot, but around mental health and sales. So we had you on the podcast a couple of years ago or so. So we really have never worked together professionally. I have no idea how he keeps up with everything, but these different kind of chat rooms or things I'm in, he's always, I might give like a 2-line answer to something, but he's always extremely thoughtful in terms of what he says and how he says it. Definitely a thoughtful expert on all things sales and training and around go-to-market strategy as well. He's got some great clients like Zoom, Salesforce, Gainsight, and a whole host of startups. He's an advisor and consultant to lots of growing companies. I'm amazed on his LinkedIn. You can book appointments with him. And frequently when he posts, he'll say, hey, call me, text me, FaceTime me, and puts on his number, something I would never do. So kudos to you. And, a lot of executives would have a staff kind of behind him doing it. But with him, it's totally him. Also impressive. He had, it's probably low now, but 57,000 followers. So certainly you are very well regarded. And I've not had the opportunity to go. But Surf and Sales, he has a cool trip. And Tucker, I think we have that link there. So if you want to give a little plug for that, Richard, maybe.
Sure. No, thank you so much. This is the longest and nicest intro ever. I appreciate it. And I hate talking about myself. Surf and Sales is an event we host in November in Costa Rica. We do 2 of them, and we take about 15 or 16 people. We spend about 4 hours a day on sales, mental health, business related content and concepts and all kinds of entrepreneurial stuff. And then we spend the rest of the time just, being present with people and having those in between moment conversations. And yes, surfing, you don't have to surf if you don't want. Surfing lessons and food and just, it's not a drunken fest, that's for sure. But it's a good time. Thanks for letting me bring it up.
Absolutely. So I think surfing is probably the only sport I can't do. I opened up the office for EMC in Australia. Um, I'm dating myself. I think it was 87 or so. For the life of me, I could not get on. These guys are like, what's wrong with you? Like, I don't know. And over the years, I've tried a couple times, and I can do a lot of other things. I'm just not wired that way. Do you actually surf?
I do. And I didn't start surfing until I was about 49. And I did it because I wanted to teach my kids that you're never too old to learn something. And I fell in love with it. And that's actually, we were down in Costa Rica, and my buddy Scott Leese and I put it together. And he's like, how come nobody does a sales conference here? I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know, let's do it. And that's how it started. Like that was the basics of it. So, and it's been, since 2018 and we've done it. We actually snuck one in February of 2020, right before COVID hit. So we've not missed a calendar year.
There you go. Awesome. Well, it's certainly a great time and fantastic professional networking experience, I'm sure. So, jumping into the questions, speaking of dating you, so you are older than me, but you're University of Arizona in '91. And I think your
Correct.
first job out of school was actually at the Gap.
Yeah. Well, actually, my first job in high school was at the Gap. And I fell in love with it. And I was like, oh, I can get out of college and go work at the Gap in jeans and t-shirts. I was very anti coat and tie from the get-go as a kid, and I hated it. So it was the right natural fit for me.
And then maybe quickly go through your impressive career from there.
Yeah. Moved from there to selling into old school newspaper classified ads. Then moved in to tech and sold educational software. If anybody ever did Reader Rabbit or Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, I was running the team that sold that into your schools. Um, then got into computer security, got into the SaaS world, got into all the technology stuff, working for a great API company about 12 years ago. They were actually getting bought and by Intel, and I didn't make the spreadsheet, which was fine. And they hugged me out the door, and people started asking me for my advice, and I was like, oh, people want my opinion. And so that's how I sort of fell into this sales training role. So that's the quick version.
Oh, fantastic. What was your first consulting gig?
My very first consulting gig was down in Austin, um, and they, I was literally using a Yahoo email address, like it was crazy. And they asked me to come down there every week, and I said sure. I was trying to find a real job, and they just said, please don't look for a job while you're here. And they were paying me enough that I didn't need to do that. And on the first week flying back, I sit down on the plane next to this guy, and literally blue suede shoes, jeans, and a blazer. Got to be a startup guy. We start talking, and it's Nick Meta from Gainsight. This is
Ah,
when Gainsight had 15 employees. I'm not kidding. And we started chatting, and we just had this great conversation. And we got shushed by the flight attendant twice. We were not drinking. We were just having a good time. And the next thing you know, I had a second client. So my consulting business happened very weird, in a weird way, that I had two people paying me for 30 days of business each, and I was making what I would make in 6 months in 60 days. And I'm like, oh man. So it's and I've never looked back. It's been amazing.
awesome. So maybe tell us more about your Harris Consulting Group.
Yeah. So we offer go-to-market strategies for early stage and mid-sized stage startups in most cases, in addition to sales training, where we teach reps how to earn the right to ask questions, which questions to ask, and when. And that sales training can be everything from prospecting and email to cold calling, into sales and discovery and qualification and negotiation and discounting and how not to discount and all those things, all the way through to customer success and upselling. So we really do have this, full funnel sales training approach.
Wow. There's certainly a lot right. There's a lot wrong. What are the kind of most common, maybe one or two things that you see sales reps not doing or could do better?
Well, first thing is I'll say it's not the sales rep's fault. Most of the time it's management's fault because they don't know how to train, coach, and stick to it. So
Totally.
what I feel like a lot of reps don't do is we're really good at asking some basic questions. We don't dive deep enough. And believe me, I have my moments too. Like I'm good at it, but there's always a moment where I'm like, oh, I forgot to ask this question. Where we drive to economic impact. It's one thing to know that this is the pain they're having. The real question is, well, how much pain is there, right? Is it a headache or a migraine? And the only way you can do that is asking additional questions that drive you to numbers and dollars, that talk to you about not just what it takes and how much it's costing you and the hard costs of salaries and lost time. And it's also, well, if you got half that time back, what would you do with it with your company? How much is another deal worth? How much is, I'm working with this medical group right now. How much faster could you get a drug out to market, in like 6 months? And I'm like, okay, well, what's a new drug worth to you? So like getting into that kind of deep economic impact that really provides where the value is. That's the first thing. The second thing I think that everybody makes is that too many people talk about what they do and not the pain they solve. Nobody cares what you do. Nobody cares I'm a go-to market or sales strategist. They do pay attention when I say I teach reps how to earn the right to ask questions, which questions to ask and when. There's not a C-level revenue person, anybody who knows a sales team who doesn't know exactly what that means.
Right.
And so, the value prop is the pain you solve, not what you do.
Well, in the whole value selling side, right up the alley of Spotlight.ai, they help, a lot of these companies have these, value engineers and these big teams, but they really do a great job of automating it. But I'll usually say over the years, if you're in the elevator with the CFO and you got 20 seconds or 30 seconds, if they're a customer or you're trying to get an order, what are you going to say? Right. And it's not all the gobbledygook. It's the pain, but pain specifically tied into how you're going to help generate more revenue in the case of your drug situation, or save money, or get a competitive advantage, or maybe for security, help keep them out of jail, or
Yeah, I don't go down the path of make you more effective and efficient. I'd probably go down the path of jail. So what do you do to make sure you stay out of jail? Like I would easily go into something that freaks them out.
Yeah.
Rather than talk about what I do, right? And very specifically, I don't necessarily believe in an elevator pitch, because I would just simply say, how do you handle this problem? I'm curious. And I would tee it up so that then I could then spin that. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, I just meant you're physically in the elevator with the CFO. Yeah. What are you going to say?
I'm going to say, how do you handle this challenge?
Exactly.
Because you're not going to care what I am or what I do or why I'm there.
Yep. There you go. All right. So to the book, Seller's Journey.
Yes.
So what you got so much great content out there. What made you do something like this? And albeit, I'll say in a kind way, also so small, when you've got like just gobs of content out there.
Yeah. Well, I should have written this like 4 years ago, and I actually have versions of this from 4 years ago. And finally, I just got with the program and did it, and realized that there were some concepts that were not being talked about in a way that resonates with people, that is sticky, that's not textbooky. I've read so many sales books and they feel like textbooks. And if you read this, like, you'll be like, does Richard really talk that way? Yeah. There's some F-bombs in there, and there's like, BS stuff called out. And it's like, yeah, it's meant to be a conversational book about sales so that you can learn how to have a conversation, in addition to all the tactics that's there. So that was a part of it. The other piece was that I'm very, you and I know each other sort of from this mental health and sales perspective. So there's this mental game of sales that I feel like a lot of people don't talk about in a way that's makes people go, oh, I'm not the only one. And so the first part of the book is around the mental piece, and not just us, but what is our customer? What are our prospects? What are they thinking? How are they thinking? So I put that piece in there as sort of the beginning, and then it gets into very specific, almost role play tactics of things that should be in someone's playbook. So I felt like that wasn't out in the market. Maybe it is, I don't know. So I wrote it. So we'll see.
Perfect. So we'll just dive into it. So one of the first topic areas is get your map in your compass.
Yeah. So, I created this thing 12 years ago called NEAT Selling, NEAT, which stands for need, the economic impact, access to authority, and timeline. And I was just trying to differentiate myself. And originally it was going to be called Nate Selling. I was going to have this little character. And then I realized I could turn it into NEAT and make it look like a compass with the N at north and the E at east. And that really resonated, because no sale is the same direction every time, right? We've been conditioned by CRMs to think our sales process is linear. And it kind of is, but there are times where certain topics come up sooner than later, right? It could be pricing, it could be a demo, it could be all these different things. So I made it look like a compass. So that's the whole purpose of the get your map and a compass, because you kind of got to know where you're going, right? That's what a sales process does, but it's not that linear. So you do need this map, you need this compass. And so that's sort of where the seller's journey came about, and why we call it that.
That's great. And then the neat selling compass is then presumably just the compass around the need and economic and access, authority, and timeline.
Yep. And the part of it too is that, yes, it has a flow of need, economic impact, access to authority, timeline, but that's not where every conversation starts, right? So it's there are many times where someone will say, Richard, we just missed our quarter. I need to talk to you. And it's like, okay, well, now we're kind of starting with the economic impact. Okay, well, why did you miss the quarter? Now I can get into the needs and that kind of stuff, and who's driving the initiative, right? Because look, every decision these days is made by a committee. It's not made by one person at all, right? In fact, it doesn't matter who the decision maker is. I tell people all the time, don't ask for who the decision maker is. They're never going to tell you, and it's always more than one person. Instead, ask them, who's the skeptic? At the end of a meeting, Randy, you and I have this meeting. Hey, Randy, I know at the end of this call, you're probably going to go talk to your team, because that's how it always works. Just out of curiosity, Randy, who on this team is the most skeptical person you have to talk with? What are they skeptical about? Because I'm not getting to a decision maker until I figure out the skeptic. So that's kind of where this map and compass stuff comes in, of like, oh, I need to take a different direction than what I've been taught to do, because I think there's something different that can be done.
Yeah. And these days too, I mean, you show up to a sales call, say, and the users are so much more, assuming they did any homework at all, they're so much more educated than, they ever were previously. And they are already have.
I just had a conversation, I just had a conversation with Matt Hines on his show, that there's this, they're 70% of the way down the decision-making process. And he believes it. He follows the stats, and he's a marketing guy, so he gets it. I just don't believe it. I just don't believe that someone's that far down the decision.
I don't think 70%, but they have at least a point of view and they have some knowledge. I would say maybe, I'd say 30%, right? They should be.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it. And the other piece is, we also have an advantage because we actually do have more knowledge about them than they do about us. And we do take the time to do the research, right? There are tools out there that give us the personality of this person. So I could talk to Randy the way Randy wants to be spoken with, not the way Richard thinks he should talk. The way Rebecca likes to have a conversation is different than how Richard or Randy likes to have this conversation. So there's tons of stuff out there that we can do so much more research. And then, the last thing I'll say about this too is that, and this is kind of why the book is called The Seller's Journey, is that there is no such thing as a buyer's journey. It does not exist. It's a big myth we've all been taught to believe in, and it's not true. There's only a seller's journey that we create along with marketing, and all the buyer has is experience. So it's about a buyer's experience through a seller's journey. There is no the buyer's journey. It does not exist. It exists in the context of our journey that we put them through, but it's all about the buyer experience.
Yeah, totally interesting. And I mean, focusing on the skeptic, that's a great idea, because especially, internally, they're probably, kind of gun shy. So if you can kind of do some of the dirty work to help convince, so say if you have a champion, if you can do some of the dirty work to convince the skeptic.
That's what I'm talking about, right? Like, that's the whole point, is, so, okay, Randy, so what are they skeptical about? Oh, you need this case study. Oh, they're skeptical about ROI, or, oh, they're skeptical about stickiness, or, oh, they're skeptical about the competitor. Now, all of a sudden, I can give Randy some information so that Randy doesn't maybe have to be as much of a ping pong ball back and forth, right? So that's the key to the skeptic, because I'll get to the decision maker. I'll find them later. Right now, I need to know who I got to get through to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, as you think about the seller's journey, what about anything more about the process?
Well, it's a little bit, it depends on how you want to define it, but the sales process is the same. The challenge I see, and this is more of a tactical piece, but things that I see over and over again are things where stage names are called demo or proposal or contract, which are not stage names. Those are activities within each stage. So the key for me is, look, every sales process I know is suspect, prospect, qualifying, discovery.
Position. Tucker, are you there? All right. Looks like we have Richard may have bounced out.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. That was weird. So I'm on a landline. Like, this is crazy.
That's right. So maybe just repeat the last 10 seconds.
Yeah. So every sales process is called suspect, prospect, qualifying, discovery, selection, negotiation, and closing. That's it. Everything else is an exit criteria underneath that. Demo, that's an exit criteria, right? Negotiation, pricing conversation, that's an exit criteria. Contracts, that is a exit criteria. All that stuff. So that's the piece that I think is what matters the most, right? Is understanding that. So,
gotcha. And then you say sales is always personal.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't take it personally, right? Like, it's a competition, it's a game, and that doesn't mean we need to be manipulative to people. I'm not suggesting that. I was always told, and I even taught for a long time, oh, don't take it personally. They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting the company or the idea. And I'm like, actually, they are rejecting me. Don't ask me to carry that banner and then tell me not to feel bad when someone doesn't like my banner. Like, so that's a big part of the mental game of, like, let's meet people where they are and talk about the stuff, right? Because we all know that you have to go through some level of, decompression when you lose a sale, right? You have to go through some level of grief, and to pretend like it doesn't exist and just get back on the phone. Like, it's like, dude, this isn't the 80s and 90s anymore, or early 2000s even. So that to me is what that mental piece is all about.
Totally. I had years, it was probably in the 80s or 90s. I was at a EMC, and there's a rep, I won't say his first name, last name Rinaldi. And we're on a speakerphone talking, trying to get the deal done. And basically we were told we didn't get it. We lost. We thought we hung up, and the rep just screamed, dropped F-bombs, right? And then we had no idea, right? So we leave the room, whatever. And then the customer prospect thing calls me, like, I can't believe that. I'm like, well, it's just passionate. He cares, and he's took it personally.
Yeah.
Like, he's yelling at me. I'm like, no, you kidding me? Like, that's what we want.
Yeah. I give that guy a bonus anyway.
Totally hear you. What about respecting contracts?
Yeah, so that's just sort of how I encourage people to start conversations, right? This is where you earn the right to ask questions, right? How do you start a meeting? And there's different kinds of respect contracts, right? It's not just about sending the agenda, which is part of it, but there's digital respect contracts of the calendar invite. There's a digital respect contract of the email you send before a meeting, or even after a meeting as part of the respect contract. There are, how do you do it verbally? So it's really, how do I introduce it? There's a respect contract for a demo call. How do I walk into a demo call, with people I've already spoken with, and make sure that this doesn't just turn into some massive, death by 1,000 mouse clicks, right? How to do it with negotiation or any of these things. So it's really just like, and I'm a big fan of this, and people, I'd be curious, by the way, people who are in the audience, if you want to ask questions, like,
oh, I forgot. Yeah. Please. Sorry.
Do, I hate talking about
behind the scenes to pull them up. So definitely have any comments. Definitely ask any questions. Sorry, I get totally sucked in here. Sorry.
That's all right. And so it's just a way to, like, respect yourself as much as it is your prospecting customer. It's a way for you to be able to say at the end of any deal, even if you lose it, that I've done all I can do. It sets you up for, what do you do when you get ghosted? Right? There's this part, in any respect contract that's going to say, look, if it doesn't fit, just say so. Likewise, I'll tell you if I can't help. And by the way, I'll even tell you who to talk to, right? Like, that's respect contract. So that if someone ghosts you, you could say, hey, by the way, I haven't heard from you in a while. Normally when I go this long, Randy, kind of means people have lost interest. We both agreed we'd let each other know. Is that what's happened here? Like, should I just, move on? And so it gives you this ability to do things like that. It gives you the ability to ask the questions. There's a transition statement in a respect contract that's super critical of, like, I get inbounds all the time. I want this, I want this, I want this. And I'll run through a respect contract and I'll say, so what made you want to take the call today, aside from what you'd already told me? What's happening at the organization that's prompting this conversation in the first place? What's the experience you're having, so that I understand how to have this conversation? So those are all the different elements without going into deep dive stuff.
Gotcha. I mean, for sport, I don't know what you're like, but once in a while, if it's a, cold call, I just pick it up just to see. And 99% of the time, they don't know who I am. They don't know anything. If they're trying to sell whatever, whatever. Do you know anything about me? Have you looked me up? No. I'm like, okay, well, let me give you 2 bits of advice that, will help you. How old are you? 24. I'm like, okay, great. So you got another, 30, 40 years. So you might want to do some homework next time. Yeah.
Right.
Well, like, no, that's it. Just do that. Leave it at that. But talk about the respect contracts. You brought up lots of hot buttons. I'll try to touch on a few of them, but agendas for sales calls, you rarely see that. A lot of these things used to be staples, 20 years ago, and especially if they're multi-pronged, sales calls where you're going to have different people on the customer side. You might have the sales rep, you might have an executive, but not having the agenda just obviously it's not respectful, right? It's not professional, and you lose control of what you have set up for a sales call, right?
Yeah. The whole, one of the biggest things people ask me for is helping our reps stay in control of the conversation. And I'll say the first conversation or the entire conversation, because it can be separate and it's often everything. And I'm like, well, okay, well, that's why we sort of start at the beginning with this concept of a respect contract. And these are the elements of it. And how do you do it? And how do you send it? Like, people love, I ask everybody all the time, like, how many of you put an agenda in the calendar invite? And they're like, me. And I'm like, great. Just out of curiosity, how many of you actually read an agenda before it pops up 5 minutes before the meeting? Like, do you even read it when it first comes in? Some do, some don't. I never do. Like, I'm too ADHD. And so I'm like, well, let's send it as an email too. Hey, I'm looking forward to talking to you next Tuesday. Here's our proposed agenda. It's introductions, it's understand the challenges, it's answer your questions about us, and it's determine next steps, right? What makes you want to take this call today? So that's my email that goes out. I get like a 95% plus open rate on it. I get like a 28% response rate, but that's okay. I don't care.
Yeah.
I just want to know that I did my job the right way, right? I need to be able to go to bed going, I didn't let that slip through the cracks, right? And it kind of goes back to that experience of, like, it's about the buyer's experience. If, as you said, Randy, nobody's doing it and I am, well, doesn't that make me, stand out just a smidge more than the other person? Right. So it starts there. So that's where it really begins.
Another thing is, at the end, they never, like I always say, okay, leave 5 minutes to recap our next steps. Everybody always ends it. Okay, we'll follow up to get the next meeting.
Oh my God.
Guess what? It takes you 2 weeks till you can get it set, and then the meeting's going to be another 2-3 weeks. So instead of being a week out, then it's a month out, right?
Yeah. So I'll give some advice on this one, right? So one, yes, I agree with you. In your respect contract, you talk about time, you talk about calling a timeout with 5 minutes left. Yes, I actually set an alarm on my phone for give me that 5 minutes, right? Because to your point, it's the doorknob. Oh yeah, we'll email next week. Here's the best way to close every meeting. Hey, Randy, I know you're going to go talk to your team. I know you're going to get some feedback and do some more due diligence. Is it okay if we put some time on the calendar next week or the week after? Because you know what? It's a whole lot easier to reschedule something than it is to schedule something. And look, if you decide you don't want to have this meeting, just cancel it. But how do you feel about just putting it on the calendar?
Yep.
Now, all of a sudden, you prevented that problem that you discussed. And you'd be surprised how many people are like, yeah, that's actually a good idea.
Yeah.
There are people who will say no. About 30% when I say it, say, no, I need to get back to you. I'm like, okay, but at least I asked.
Totally.
Right? And at least it's on the calendar.
Right.
And literally 70% of the people say, yeah, let's go ahead and do it, because they agree it's so hard to reschedule. It's so hard to schedule something. It's easier to reschedule. So.
And then another pet peeve I have is people that just do you got to show up on a Zoom and then they have declined like sometime recently. Yeah. And I'll say, I just want to make sure what happened. Oh, I declined it. Like, what, you didn't want to send me a note to give me a heads up, or like, when did you figure that out? You only just, I appreciate things do come up more times than not. Right. It's just like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, if you do this and they say yes to the meeting, you get to get that meeting out in addition to any email you send of summary of notes. But now all of a sudden they've got 2 or 3 things in their inbox right away that reminds them that this meeting is going to happen, not 2 weeks from now when they're like, who the heck is that person?
Absolutely. All right. We got from Bhupinder, nice comment. Great advice. This is so important and makes the conversation active, even though next conversation could be a week later. Thanks, Bhupinder. Mm-hmm. So just as a reminder, others want to comment or ask questions, you got a great expert here on the line. And how about the summaries, right? The recap notes afterwards. I mean, that's just a total, and there's so many tools, and some of these people are using the tools, and like, you just got to be kidding me, right?
Yeah, it's like, it's never been easier. My problem is that I'm such a control freak in how I want that email summary to go, that none of the tools write the summary the way I want in an email format that I want.
But at least it gives you some bullets, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Believe me. But that's a Richard problem. Like, it's Richard's control freakness of all this stuff, right? But yeah, there's no reason, if you've never done it, that you shouldn't be doing it now. Even if, and believe me, all the summary tools, at least the ones I've seen, they're all good. And they're not like, oh, that's good enough. They're good. Some of them will actually give you, here are the assigned next steps for everybody. Here are these things, right? Like, they're good. Richard just has this control freak problem.
Yeah. Or you just do it on your own if you don't have the tools. But again, that's
where mine started. Mine actually became like, I take notes in mine. It's a template. And I take notes as I'm talking to someone, and I even tell them, so that by the time I'm done with the call, 80% of the email's already written. Because there's nothing worse than having to like go back and rewrite an entire email. And I have a whole template built and all that stuff. So
awesome. Really cool. Anyway, we could keep talking about all these respect things. I'll move on. So what about listening and asking tactics?
Yeah. So, I was once told, well, a couple of times I was told a few things. One was 25% less. I'm like, what? They're like, Richard, talk 25% less, listen more. I was like, okay, I still have that problem. You can ask my wife. These are the jokes, people. They're not getting any better, I promise. So that's an exercise. And one of the things I do with teams is, depending on the generation of the team, but Randy, for you and I'll walk in and I'll do a session on Billy Joel, the Piano Man. And I'll ask people questions like, okay, who was the guy at the bar that got his drinks for free? Who was practicing politics? Like, this song that so many of us know. And I'll change it to a Beyonce tune or a Taylor Swift tune, depending on the group. And most people know most of those questions. They don't know all of them, but they know most of them. I'm like, okay, well, how much studying did you do before you went into your meeting? Right? And they're like, none. Okay, so then you don't know the answer to you know the answer to these questions because you've done it so many times. You've heard this song, you've sang it, you've done all this stuff. You got to pay attention at that deeper level so that you can memorize it like you memorize these songs, And so that's a really important aspect of that. And then we get into, well, what is active listening? How do you show someone you're listening? How do I show Randy? How do I show any of you, if I'm on a call, that I'm actually listening to you? Right? Like, I literally will say to people, hey, my camera's here, you're over here. And by the way, if you see me looking down typing, it's notes. I'm taking notes on our conversation, and I'm going to send you those notes. And everybody's like, oh yeah, I do that too. Or, oh, hey, yeah, I get it. No worries. But I say it because people will think you're not.
Yeah.
We are terrible human beings sometimes if we're not getting the attention and love we think we deserve. So if I tell them I'm taking notes, then I can get away with doing it. And I tell them I'm not on LinkedIn. I'm taking notes of this conversation. So before I even start, as part of my respect contract, I'm telling them that we're here for them, not for me. And I'm here to listen to what they have to say. So those are the little things. And then I do teach about open and closed-ended questions and, how do you bucket questions, and how do you get to economic impact and access to authority and all those things. So we get into that, and we get into different ways to ask different questions. But we can only do that if we listen. If we don't listen, we can't ask good questions.
Absolutely. What about maybe kind of, there's obviously you probably have hundreds, but kind of one or two of your most highly recommended questions?
Well, one is that skeptic question. Who's the most skeptical person, and what are they skeptical about? Another one is, is about timeline. What's happening now, Randy, that it's February, 20th, 2024, that's different than a year ago? What makes us have this conversation now versus last year? And I'm trying to get into, I call it painting pictures of pain, right? We want to paint pictures of pain, or have our customer paint their picture of pain, because that's the story we need to tell. That kind of goes back to this theory I have about, talk about the pains you solve, not what you do, right? It talks about, I teach reps how to earn the right to ask questions, what questions to ask, and when. Or I help founders with their go-to-market strategy so they don't trip over everything I've tripped over, right? Like, that's a picture of pain people can resonate with. So that's really where I'm heading with those kind of tactics of those two questions.
Oh, great. Really good stuff here. And then what about objection and competition tactics? So objection tactics?
Yeah. So there's a thing. So one, there's no such thing as, you don't handle objections. Nobody wants to be handled. And again, the joke is, ask my wife. She does not want to be handled. I still forget that sometimes. That being said, I need to marinate in the objection. Oh, it's too expensive. Well, what do you mean by that? What were you expecting? And it's not like, when did you create that budget, or, how did you come up with that budget? It's more like, tell me more about the feeling. Tell me more about the emotion, right? What makes it feel expensive for you? How does it compare to what you've seen in the marketplace? Right? I need to spend time there. I need to marinate in these objections. And that's one around pricing. The same thing with competitors. We often hear people will say, well, can you do this like this competitor? And the salespeople will be like, oh my God, they want that feature. And we run back to the product marketing team, and we're like, oh my God, we could just get this one thing done. We could close the deal, blah, blah, blah. When all you really need to ask is, hey, we can't do that. How important is that particular feature to you even making this decision? But we're all taught to handle the objection. Oh, well, here's our workaround. Well, they didn't ask you if you had a workaround. I don't want to talk about some complicated workaround. Workarounds are not good things to talk about unless you have to. And you don't know if you have to unless you know how important it is for them to have this particular feature. So those are things that I talk about with competition. And I've got stuff about, well, how do you compare against I mean, I can go into a ton of stories, but I want to be respectful to time. So.
Wow, so great. I was going to ask earlier, we're talking about demos or evaluations. I mean, yeah. I still see, which is mind-boggling, right? They'll kind of go through it, and then I'll get called, hey, I need help here. And once they do a poor job of articulating to me where they're at, okay, so basically saying you did a demo, there's no expectation, there's no criteria. If it does A, B, and C, then they're going to buy it or not, or what the next steps are. Yeah. And then for some ridiculous reason, you extended it, which is a big deal for your company, I guess, but you did it without getting anything in return. Do you see that a lot? Do you see sloppiness on demos?
Yeah. So first of all, first thing I'll say about demos. Demos are demos. They're not product training. Stop doing product training. Stop doing death by 1,000 mouse clicks. When you test drive a car, you do not try to figure out how the satellite radio works. When you test drive a car, you are not trying to connect your Bluetooth. That's not what you're doing in a test drive. Right? This goes back to that respect contract of a demo. Right. It's kind of being able to say, hey, Randy, before we jump into this demo, just out of curiosity, I think you want to see these 3 things. What else do you want to see? Because I don't need to give you death by 1,000 mouse clicks. Right? Okay, now I've confirmed what we're going to talk about. By the way, Randy, At the end of this demo, let's assume it goes really, really well, Randy. What happens on your side? Because I don't want to get to the end of the demo where we run out of time, like we were talking about earlier. I want to pre-qualify the demo a little bit. Hey, Randy, as there might be other people who would be interested in this demo. If they're not here today, what do you think those people would want to see, though? If your skeptic were here today, what would you think they would want to know about? So now I can start to get this information long before I even jump into the demo. And then it becomes much more interesting. It becomes much more customized for that person. And again, it's a different experience. Nobody's asking these questions. So those are the kind of things that I think about around the demo. So
great. All right, we have a question from Ryan. What advice would you give those new to a full cycle role in the age of remote selling?
Okay. If you're new to the role, which part is new? Meaning, have you been in sales? So you've done closing, and maybe you had appointment setters or SDRs or BDRs, and you need to lean into that BDR role, right? Well, I would start learning as much as I can. I would educate myself. I would buy a book. I would go in, there are several online portals. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention them, but there are tons of online. Yeah. So jbarrows.com. John's a good friend of mine. He's got a portal. My training's in there. He's got prospecting training in there. He's got sales training in there. And I would self-educate in a remote world because you cannot wait for them to train you, right? That's the first thing. Yes, you can find, there are people like me out there who do coach one-on-one. So you can Google sales coaching one-on-one and see if that's something you want. And you can ask your company to pay for it. Like the fact I see, that you haven't done a full cycle yet, Ryan. The challenge is, well, without hurting your job viability, I don't want you, I'm mindful of that, is to go to them and say, okay, well, what support are you going to give me? You hired me for this role. Are you giving me any support? Do I have funds? Do I have $2,000 a year I can spend myself to go get educated? Yes, I'll get your approval, right? Again, I think, I'm not, of course, buy my book, available online. But self-educate. Don't wait for them to deliver to you, right? And the fact, Ryan, that you're even asking the question tells me that you're going to be good at it, because you're asking, you're getting vulnerable. Like, here you are talking to a couple of strangers. I don't know how many people are listening here, and you're getting vulnerable to say, I need help with this. Dude, that is the best skill to have, in my opinion, is to be vulnerable and put yourself out there. So just keep self-educating.
There you go. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it seems you touched on a little bit in the beginning, Richard, that the kind of management is, to me, I think is kind of, flawed compared to what it used to be. So for whatever reason, I think the coaching is not what it should be or could be, or what it used to be. And also just the whole notion of giving feedback. There's different cultures. I had on Tom Hannigan, who's president of ServiceNow, and he's totally old school. We give feedback. We want to give and get, and that's what we're going to do. Some other people culturally at the companies, hey, we can't do it. They're good. Some of the younger and career people, they might get upset, or it might ruffle their feathers. So, Ryan, my advice would be to be a sponge. It's great that you're taking the ball, but any interaction that you have with anybody, hey, what could I do different or better? Why are you successful? Please give me feedback. When I would go on sales calls, myself, I'd say, hey, what feedback do you have for me? Like, you're GM, you're an SVP. You kidding me? I've never had, what's feedback for me? And then they would hopefully ask. If not, then I'd say, hey, can I give you some feedback? Right. So it's a two-way street, but kind of that authenticity is just, I think so lacking these days.
Yes. And the other thing, Ryan, because there's so much you could learn in anybody. This is even a management tactic, but Ryan, when you get a chance in the right moment where you've done something and you want to learn, is to ask, say, hey, Ryan or Randy, hey, Richard, what's one thing I could have done better on this call? Because your coach is going to give you 20 things, and you can't focus on 20 things. It's not possible. Nobody learns to hit a golf ball that way. Nobody learns to swing the tennis racket.
That's my problem.
Right. Serena and Venus did not become experts because they figured on everything. They figured on one thing at a time. And to the sales leaders here, same thing for a pipeline review. Hey, Richard, what's the one thing preventing this deal from moving forward? I guarantee you there's more than one, but I need someone to tell me one to get the conversation started. Because otherwise, it's like, well, I don't know, I got to do this and I got to do this. Like, no, give me one and then figure it out from there. So,
and I'll overly simplify the whole thing. So assuming that you're doing everything right in sales, the more sales calls you can do, the better. So the more you're remote and you have to do the, Zoom's great. If you can get face-to-face, great. But the more, however you want to define sales calls, the more you can do, the better it helps everything.
by the way, I'd be curious if people just want to say yes or no or whatever, if they want in the chat, but how many people, whether you're remote or not, or whether you're a leader or a rep, would take feedback, even if it was an AI tool, like an AI tool, listen to your call, just say yes or no, or maybe, but because there's stuff like that exists. And I think generationally, I think, the Gen Xers like me, we're like, oh, I don't want some robot telling me what to do. Meanwhile, millennials and Gen Z are like, yeah, I'll take that coaching, so that's a piece. Like this is where we leverage technology to support the role. This is where AI helps us, not hurt us.
Yeah, totally. All right. So next we have money, pricing, and commercial terms tactics.
Yeah. So money, right? So the first thing is anytime someone asks you price or budget I hate those words. And I always tell people to change those words immediately to commercial terms. Right? Hey, Randy, I know pricing is important. Let's talk about commercial terms, because commercial terms implies an exchange of goods for services and money. Pricing and budget means they're commoditizing you. Humans, by human nature, are comparison shoppers. We're going to get commoditized all the time, every single time, right? Like even when Uber started, it was commoditized. Oh, you're just like a taxi. Well, no, we're not. Like it's not. But you get commoditized. And so understanding that and changing the conversation is really important early on. I'm a big fan of telling people, you don't give pricing and then shut up and the first person who speaks loses. That's not the concept. The concept is to say, Randy, our services are $15,379. How does that feel? Because the word feel has a different meaning. They don't know how to resist that word. Does that fit in your budget? Of course, they're not going to answer that question. They're going to get closed off. If I say, how does that feel? Every price, everything we purchase every day, every moment has an emotional tie to it. How do I feel about it? And it's an impulse, right? Because that's why the impulse stuff with the candy bars and the gum is by the checkout register. It's an impulse. It's a feeling. And I want to know how they feel. I want them to give me the answer of, hey, that feels a little high. Okay, well, now I know where I am. Great. What have you seen in the marketplace? Like, that's my first question. Oh, that feels about right, which they actually say. Okay, I'm in the ballpark. Oh, that feels a little low, which they've actually said. And I'm like, I should have taken the price up, So price, that's a big pricing thing I teach. I'll shut up there and see if you have a question or if you want me to go into something else around it or go into
No, that's great. We're getting on here at time. So a couple, maybe go shorter here, but the accountability tactics.
Well, that's that email. Like that's the summary thing, right? Is like, if I need to send an email after every sales meeting saying, here are the next steps. Here's what they're going to do. Here's what we discussed. Right. And so it's that post-meeting email that we talked about earlier, because I need to assign accountability to them. And I need to be able to walk away and say, I did my job. I did my job better than everybody else. So that's the primary piece. And then the accountability piece also of that calendar meeting of like, hey, let's put something on the calendar. It's easy to reschedule. Now I put a timeline on everything for both of us to be accountable within this time frame. Right. So that's the quick version.
Right. And never ending journey is sales.
Yeah, it doesn't stop. Like there's, I got 30 other things I could talk about. I got 30,000 things I could still learn. Right. It doesn't stop. And we have to be open. We got to be like Ryan and be vulnerable and be willing to say, what did I get right? What did I get wrong? So, that's what its never ending journey means.
Totally. So awesome content there for sure. So now huge topic, mental health issues in sales.
Yeah.
I was pretty much clueless, and I read what you wrote, and then we talked, and we had a podcast on it, and now it obviously makes so much sense. But kind of coming out of things now, are you seeing kind of improvements or still issues?
Yeah.
Management still really not that engaged?
Yeah. So I've done a couple of these with some friends. We've done the state of mental health and sales the last 2 years. I actually have the data for 2023. We just haven't put it out yet because I got all these other projects. But we've interviewed, at minimum 500 every people, and mental health has actually gotten worse than the last 3 years. It kind of got a little better in 2020, right? People forgot it, but now we're back to the same old stuff. I even had a client tell me, hey, look, sometimes stuff happens and it's okay that he said it, but he's like, Richard, it was a little frustrating that, you had to cancel about 30 or 45 minutes. He's like, I know you have family and you got to go pick up your kids. It just frustrated me. And I was like, you don't have kids, do you? He's like, no. I'm like, okay. I said, I took the feedback. I said, you're fair. That's totally fair, totally unexpected, won't happen again, but that tells me that the mental health stuff still is bad. And the data suggests too that it's still getting worse. The good news though is that if you're a leader, because we ask questions like, when you are at your peak performance, what was your leader doing to support you? Not what was so bad. And the number one thing was they were being vulnerable. They were sharing the challenges they had. And that doesn't mean, I'm going through marital problems or, a health issue. It could be that, but it doesn't have, it could be like, okay, I have this experience once. How do you think this experience would apply here to what you're trying to do with this client? I lost a deal once. Do you feel like this client who I lost feels similar to that? Or does there feel like this story where I won? That's vulnerability. That's what leadership is, right? Leading from the front. I tell leaders all the time, go record your call, go make some cold calls, record it, send it to the team and tell them to tear you apart. Put yourself out there.
Yeah.
Right? And be willing to learn. So that's what I mean by vulnerability. That improves the culture of your organization. And when you think about culture, you think about mental health. That's part of it. Like, they want to work. I think the remote thing is great economically to some extent. I think it's really hard for someone, who's, again, Ryan, thank you. You miss some culture. You miss that ability to do some team training when you're not in an office, right? It's not an easy answer. I'm not suggesting it's an easy answer. Remote selling is great for parents, particularly single parents, like where they can actually do work and then they can do some stuff at night after the kids are done or whatever. So it's you got to meet people where they're at, and that's the important piece around mental health and sales.
Yeah, definitely. Such so important. Such a great topic. So when is the report going to be out? If I put you on the spot?
I'm hoping to have it out by April or May. May is Mental Health Awareness Month in general, so that tends to be a good time to put it out. I feel bad because we were supposed to get it out last year, and we just, a little late getting the data, a little late interpreting the data. Now I got to go get it built.
Excellent. All right. Well, we will be sure to feature it. Maybe we come up with a tab on our website with it as well.
And by the way, the ones from the previous 2 years are still out there. So, State of Mental Health report is State of Mental Health and Sales report. You can Google it and find it. And the changes are still incremental in terms of it's getting worse, but the data is still accurate of what people need. So please, if this is important to you, know that it's a resource and you'll still find value in it.
Excellent. Awesome. All right. Well, you've been fantastic. So many nuggets, such great wisdom. Thanks to Spotlight for being our sponsor. Thanks, Tucker, for your help behind the scenes. And the book here, totally vouch for it. Awesome, incredible. Sellersjourney.co. And you can also check out Surf and Sands, which is a awesome learning event.
Surf and Sales.
Surf and Sales.
That's right.
Surf and Sales in Costa Rica with Richard and others. So, all right. So thanks so much. You've been awesome. Everybody have a great week, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Randy. I appreciate it. Thank you, Tucker, and thanks everybody for giving us your time today.